What's your official occupation?
My license is a licensed clinical social worker. Later, I got a PhD in social psychology, just not as a licensed
Mhm.
psychologist, but because I was interested in having more authority when I published books, and it helped
Yeah,
to have a PhD on the cover.
that's a good point. And then how many books have you published and how have you used it?
Oh, well, I published four. I mean, I haven't self-published. I've gotten publishers for four books.
Hmm.
One was co-authored with a gay guy, and one was an anthology.
Where you were born. So were you born in this country?
Oh, I was born in New Rochelle, New York,
Okay.
in 1943.
Did you have siblings or are you the only child?
Oh, I have siblings that were so much older, almost another generation.
Really?
Uh, so when my father was died at when he was 49, and so my mother, who had had a number of very distinguished careers, decided to be a homesteader and take her child, that was me, her toddler, up to the country and to get her out of the urban environment and let her be a wild country girl. So she bought a rehabable house up in about 3 hours from New York in the Hudson Valley area, and she went to work cultivating gardens and raising fruit, chickens, and raising me, the wild country child.
Huh. Were you along
So
with the
I was up
chickens?
there from the time I was three till I was uh, 14.
Hmm. It's a long time. Did you thrive?
Uh, I I I would say mixed reviews because I was alone with a very intense mom,
Mm.
and but I was indeed very exploratory from very young, and I had a really good buddy who lived at a nearby house. And we went on all kinds of adventures in the country, riding our bikes and hiking and exploring. Exploring, that was the operative word. Going over the hills and dales and finding different things like, oh, this is a cave, or this is
Huh.
a pretend Indian burial mound, or just fantasies. And then I had a lot of other playmates too. My mother had chosen this particular spot because her beloved sister had a big dairy farm next door, and so my aunt lived close by, my mother's sister, and my uncle, who worked in New York City in advertising, and then came back on the weekends. So they had about six families on that farm, and so I had a lot of playmates where the kids of the farmers
Huh.
who farmed that farm, the tenant farmers. So there were always a lot of wrestling matches, and there, as I think about, there's a lot of violence. Cowboys and Indian inspired, and fighting, wrestling. I do remember having lots of fights with boys. One who stole my bike, and I threw him into the cow trough, and then I had to pay for the doctor bill because I choked him.
Did he really?
He survived, but I'm just giving you a
Yeah,
giving
the
you
whole
a,
background.
a taste of this was a very I don't know, I guess I would say unregulated or dysregulated lifestyle here.
Mhm.
There is not much supervision. There's just a lot of adventures and a lot of I would say oh, uh, well, like Lord of the Flies is the best reference I can think of. We just who was the strongest, who could beat who at this wrestling match, trading comic books, playing baseball, riding bikes, uh, a very not supervised, nothing like kids, no cell phones, nothing like that. You just come in
Right.
sort of when you're hungry.
You know what I was thinking when you were talking about this? I wonder if the time, since I was born in the same era as you were, uh, dictated or demonstrated to us how we were supposed to fight, because somehow we were fed that information, whether we had a cell phone or not. And we didn't have that choice. Because my mother, who's really a pretty quiet person most of the time, I said to my sister, who came into the house crying and bleeding with blood running down her head, what happened to you? What happened to you? And she said, my sister said, that she'd been in this fight with this boy across the street. And he hit her with a Pepsi bottle and the glass broke. And it was a serious, I knew she was in trouble. And my mother said, well, did you hit him back? And I thought, I couldn't believe my mother said that.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? An
So
eye
I
for
can
an
hear
eye.
the same kind of stuff coming out of this story you're talking about. I thought, these
Yeah, an
moms,
eye for an
we all
eye.
bring our orientation to the situation.
Yeah, right. It's so true. It's just very, very interesting, and just not much made of injuries either. I mean, in the sense
Right.
of I come in with all kinds of grain and gravel in my knees from falling off my bike, or all kinds of injuries. And it just she put some iodine on it, I,
Very, very important.
but it just about killed you and the germs, and,
You didn't
but I
drink.
mean, it was a very, very different sort of, I don't know, orientation. It just wasn't, there's no helmets that you put on when you rode your bicycle.
Right. I needed one. But no.
It was just so interesting when I think about the transition to
Right.
such. I don't know. I'm maybe just talking about a certain class of demographic, and maybe some kids don't have that protection even now.
Right.
I'm just not sure. And I had my 22, and was shooting woodchucks, and I did. I mean, the violence was also inflicted on. I was supposed to protect the grain from the birds who were eating the grain from the chickens, and so I shoot the birds with my.
Right.
I mean, just very aggressive, and not a second thought about tenderness. Although I do remember the shooting a baby woodchuck, and I saw it didn't die, and it was kind of crawling, and I had to keep shooting it. And after that, I didn't shoot any more woodchucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because
thank you.
I realized I had some stroke of empathy, of
Right.
pain
Right.
and suffering. And from then on, I probably was about 11, and I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting self-education around how do you come
It
to
is
terms
interesting. Right.
with cruelty and your own cruelty, your own sadism, and
How
that
it
is
develops.
it's represented as well, this is what you do to survive. You have to suck it up and take care of. Otherwise, the tractor axles are going to get broken in the woodchuck holes if you don't control the population of woodchucks. So, and then you won't have
How cute they are.
harvest.
Yeah. They're pretty cute.
They are very cute.
So that,
Yeah, and I had a split in my teeth, and they always said, they at the bus on the bus, they always say, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood, because of my split in my teeth. I mean, there's a lot of bullying and teasing that went along with it.
like Madonna had that. Did you notice?
Oh, did she have a split too?
I had one
Yeah.
too. I remember, well, Madonna had one. I was all right. So then you went from there to where? How you got to be who you are today? How you moved from the woodchuck experience to today? How you developed your career? How you developed yourself? Did your sexuality impede it, impair it?
So I think my mother was very intent upon raising an independent child. So my first job was babysitting for myself. So when I was about 8 or 9, she'd give me a quarter an hour for babysitting. And also, I had an allowance also for doing certain chores, getting the coal from the basement, emptying the ashes from the stove, and that was a quarter. And then for extra money, I could cut the lawn and trim with clippers around the edges. And it was very important for me to earn money because I really, really wanted to go to the fair. I loved to go to the county fair, and it was the most exciting event of my life. Was, I mean, every year was the county fair, and hanging out with the kids in the 4-H barns, because I really, the big kids could stay overnight there, and that's with their animals, and that seemed like the height of glory for me. I didn't have an animal, but I could, I could pretend almost maybe someday I could stay overnight and sleep on the hay bales and with a blanket over me, and whatever hijinks they got. So that was my first. So I was extremely motivated because I wanted things that were fun for me to work. And then my mother was very enterprising always. And then my brother, who was, again, I told you, a generation older, he was a writer, but he earned his but didn't make money. I mean, not enough to live on from his authorship. So he wrote for corporations, he wrote speeches and so forth. And one of the things he wrote were booklets for the employees, like how to fight fatigue and how to read the Bible, little booklets that would be put in employees' racks. And so there had children's cookbooks. So he would get these extras, bring them home, and my mother would put an ad in like the Good Housekeeping magazine. You send in a quarter for this very informational, instructive pamphlet on how to fight fatigue and so forth. So, and I was employed in digging those quarters out of the cardboard that were taped in, and stamping the envelopes. She named it Home Education Council, and I'd stamp the envelopes with a official postage stamper, and put the booklets in the envelopes, and also collect the quarters and put them in rolls. This was a very important money-making job for me too. And then also sometimes, huh?
I can see why.
Yeah, although I didn't get to keep all the quarters, but I did get a cut.
What was your cut?
I don't remember that. I wish I did.
Right.
and so then and also, I would sometimes hawk the produce out on the street. The name of our house, my mother named it. There was a stream meandering through the back, couple hundred acres, that was crossed at various points by a bunch of planks that were like a barn door plank, about that size of a barn door, that the tractors could go over. And so this was three of these plank bridges. So she called her farm Three Bridges Farm. It sounds very grand, but it was not grand. Anyway, it was really good. So she had a little sign out there, Three Bridges Farm, and I'd peddle the strawberry. I try to get the cars to stop, and buy the strawberry boxes and so forth. So you see, I was employed on many fronts growing up, and I'm a firm believer in child labor. I think
most children wanted to.
Want to earn money, and freedom. It's so empowering to do things, to feel useful, to feel competent, and to earn your own money. I just can't tell you how important that was to me.
Me too.
Really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just the power of having some money. And the quarter seemed to be the generation allowance thing.
Yeah, quarter a week.
First salary was a quarter.
A quarter a week for certain chores, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, that added up. I had about $10 by the time the fair came around.
I know. Well, that was good. $10 was good.
Was big money. So I just am so fortunate. I feel so grateful and fortunate that I don't know, got a work ethic early on. Really, because I didn't have a lot going for me, so work ethic was really important. I mean, I had very gifted family members, and I was kind of average, so I really needed extra motivation.
Yeah,
it really helped to have perseverance and motivation to make up for maybe
for sure.
Motivation.
There's nothing wrong with it. People despise money, but I think it's great.
Well, for kids, and not to have things handed, to assume or lavished. I don't think it's so great for everybody to get lavished gifts, children, too much. So anyway, so then just proceeding, I just all through college, I worked. I mean, in the summers, I didn't work. I worked at my school work, but in the summers, I would always come to New York City. I was in college at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I'd come to New York City, and I'd earn money. I could earn money as a temp typist because I was really good at that.
Mm-hmm. Are you good
And,
at the keyboard now?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was that was something else that my mother said. Just learn this quick. When you're 14 or whatever, 13, and you just get a manual and learn that typewriter, and boy, you'll always be employable. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was true. It was
Right.
true.
You're
You
right.
just walk into a temp typist agency, you could always get jobs, temporary jobs, always in New York and New York. And then I went to after college. I took a freighter. I had some money because I won a couple of writing awards in college, and then my mother gave me some graduation money, and so I set off on a freighter for that landed in Hamburg, and I immediately started working. I saw help wanted, um, help in the bezooked, something like that, and in the window of the Cafe Quick in Hamburg in the seedy part of town, and I started hustling drinks right away. Hustling drinks is just that you get soldiers or some guy to buy you a drink, and then there's nothing in your drink. They buy themselves real drinks, and then they buy you a drink,
Really?
but you don't have anything. You have soda water in your drink, but
Right.
but he has to pay the same amount for your drink that he pays for his drink. He doesn't know that there's nothing in it. It's a scam.
He figures it out pretty soon, though.
Well, so that was my first European gig.
Mm-hmm. How long did
Uh,
you stay in Europe?
well, I stayed in Europe for a couple of years. I mean, Europe, Mid East, and North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I made the money last a long time hitchhiking, and I'm also working at these. I was an au pair girl for a while, and I did my longest, most successful gig was being what they call a clerk. A clerk. It was a clerk in London, typist, a typist, in other words, at a typing pool. And and I work at Cafe Self Service in Paris on the left bank.
Huh.
And the word in Down and Out in Paris, in London and Paris by George Orwell
Mm-hmm.
is tells the life of. So the word was plongeur, Plongeur, and I was a plongeur at self service. That means I worked in the bowels of the self service, and I peeled eggs and chopped vegetables, and I polished. I filled the l'huile and moutarde and bottles and polished the brass. And I managed to always manage to smuggle out quite a bit of eggs in my bra for to eat, and various
Hey,
items with.
did you hard boil them first?
They were hard boiled. They were
Oh.
hard boiled eggs, so that wasn't a problem. So, and I could help my friends, my down and out friends of whom I had made, because I was a lesbian by then, and I was going to every lesbian bar in Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. So I was always involved with some people or groups of people or whatever.
It needed food.
And they all needed food. They were all down and out. It was the demi-monde. It was, it was not, these were not, uh, they were on the fringes, all of them.
Right.
So, and I had a maid's quarters and had to walk up six stories in the back stairs, steep to get to my room under the mansard roof, where near the Tuileries, and it was a hell of a hike up there, and there was no running water. There was only a hole in the wall in the ground for a toilet. I went to the Y or something to wash off every now and then, and you had to stand on the bedstead. It was straw with metal to look out the mansard little window up at the top under the roof, and so it was a very romantic and time where I was working, but also having adventures, sexual adventures.
That helps. That looking up to the roof. Probably if you'd been sort of single, that would have been more of a threat to that romance.
And I,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
We don't
and I,
notice when we're being romantic, we don't notice all those little
no, when you're 20, what do you
minor
care?
imperfections. Yeah.
Yeah, 20. I mean, at 20, this is what life is about. This is the raw stuff, right?
Right. We've got it handled. Good for you. Well, it sounds scary and interesting.
Yeah. And the other jobs I had were, yeah, I put an ad in the, I think it was the Herald Tribune. That was an English paper, English newspaper that was published in Paris at that time. Girl Friday, anybody want? And then this rich woman who was a sponsor. She had a mansion in Paris, American, sponsored sort of a matron, a patron of the arts. She liked. She was very invested in the Living Theater, which is Judith Malina and Beck, I think his last name. The two did very experimental theater, and she was supporting them. And she called me in after a response to my ad and gave me a spelling test, which I did happen to pass because I could spell picnicking. And she said nobody else had been able to spell picnicking because they didn't know there was a K in it, but I figured that out. So she hired, you never know how you're going to get hired or why.
That's right.
But then she fired me rather quickly because she had a cook and the cook asked me what I wanted for lunch. And I said what I wanted for lunch, steak and pommes frites. And she thought that was very presumptuous of
Yeah,
me
because
to
you could
ask.
get the top.
I was the help. I was the help. I'm not supposed to
It's
ask
supposed
the
to eat
cook.
like that. Right.
But the cook asked me.
Right. So much for honesty.
Anyway, so you see about my adventures and my misadventures were so I had a series of work and sex related adventures and misadventures. Yeah, so you get a flavor of my work life and how it entwined with my lesbian adventuring.
Well, I one of the things that inspired me to do careers was interviewing a woman who was a social worker. She'd gone to college, et cetera, and was working as a social worker. And then she figured out, she said, I'm a lesbian. I'm going to have to buy myself a house and, all this practical, I'm a lesbian responsibilities. And then she went back to school. So, and now, doesn't have to worry about her finances. But just that awareness is very important for a woman.
I
That's
think
like,
it's just so it was so I mean, I just realized I'm going to really have to do it myself. There's no and
yeah,
anyway, the people in my family who did get married usually the women usually ended up supporting the men anyway. It's not as though there was ever some sort of refuge if you get married to a man. They
mm-hmm.
usually had to go back to school and get some degree because the man was not making the money. So
Right.
I it was such a hoax that was such a hoax I saw that was being perpetrated on women that somehow they're going to have a safe harbor if they get married. What bullshit is that? Anyway, that was my take on the
It's
whole
still
thing.
being perpetrated on them. I mean, that's still that continues. What was a first moment or time in your life when you realized that you were a lesbian?
Let's see. Well, my lesbian history was I was sent away to a boarding from the country. I told you about my mother thought I was watching too much television and hanging out with disreputable people, so she sent me off to a fancy boarding school when I was 14. And and my first day there, my new roommate came in from the shower, and she was naked, and she had a turban towel like wrapped around like a turban around her head, and I immediately was absolutely smitten because she was so beautiful. It was like a vision, walking in naked with this white turban, Turkish towel around her head, and so I was immediately a lesbian then.
How old were you then?
14.
Uh,
And then from there I was slavishly devoted to her, and she was not a lesbian. Unfortunately, she was she allowed me to kind of worship her. And at one point, she, she sort of took me into her bedroom and kind of touched me and messed around with me. And then she got up and I was ecstatic, and she got up and washed her hands and said, "You're disgusting."
Oh,
And so this was a very powerful experience for me. I
yeah.
mean, this was, I loved her. I was so turned on, and she thought I was disgusting. It was a very intense, I guess you would call it an inflection point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it how it shaped my life or my world, but the thing was, I was very influenced by Catcher in the Rye, which was a very popular book at that time. So I decided every night, because you had to have lights out, I would go and write what happened in my journals, and I wrote about this,
Mm-hmm.
and I I my at one point I was under huge pressure because there was a junior prom coming up, and there was no way I could get a date for that prom, but it was so vital to have a date for that prom. I don't know if I'm just telling you the context. I don't know if this figured
No,
in, but
don't
anyway,
judge.
what happened was in the night I had a bloody nose, and I woke up and my pillow was covered with blood,
Mm-hmm.
and I had an anxiety attack. And they took me, I started hyperventilating, and they took me to the infirmary. And at that point, all my journals were discovered.
Ah,
And by the way, the headmistresses were lovers, incidentally, at
mm-hmm.
the school. I mean, that's become evident to me since then. They were,
that's, that's a common line, actually.
yes, very common, of course. And so anyway, so
I don't know how common it is, so
I
I
was kicked
started
out
to.
of the school. I was kicked out of the school, and this woman was also kicked out, even though she wasn't a lesbian. But I think they thought she was such a bad influence because of what I had written in my journal.
About
So,
her.
but it wasn't fair that she was. I mean, we neither of us should have been expelled. But in any case, I was expelled. So that was my first brush with lesbianism, and I was sent first to a. I was trying to be straight and make out with boys in the cemetery back at home, and then I came in late, and my mother said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "None of your business." And she hit me, slapped me, and I got to a big fight with her. And then I ran away to my brother's in New York. I took a train in, and after that, so it was very turbulent
Mm-hmm.
adolescence because of the lesbian interface and trying to be straight. And then my mother sent me to a school for disturbed adolescents called
Really?
Devereaux. Uh, but in any case, I was only there for 6 weeks, and then I made up with her and went out to California. Yeah, I made up. I mean, I made peace with her, and she was in California at that time, getting a doctorate in psychology. She'd finished her homesteading, and she was getting her doctorate. So I went and lived in Riverside. She was at University of California, Riverside then, and I finished high school in Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was that episode. But anyway, so I was a lesbian, but in Riverside, I just wanted to be straight because I had gotten in so much trouble in
Right,
school,
right.
and so I was struggling to be straight. And then I guess when I was in college, I had a dream. I was lovers. Uh, After I had a dream in my junior year, was my sophomore year. It was there was a book that came out called The Grapevine about the lesbian underground in New York City, and I was even too scared to go to the bookstore to get it. So I had my friend go, and on the front cover there was a picture of two women holding hands from the back against the New York City skyline.
Oh, really? Huh.
And I read it immediately, and I had a dream that night that I was a lesbian in a bar. And then when I woke up the next day, I was a lesbian.
Oh, wonderful.
I
Yeah,
mean, it was so I mean, I had always been a lesbian, but it offered me a niche, an identity.
right, right.
So,
So
and then
you can take the cover and say, "How did I know?" That could be weird. And then write the story. Right? You have more stories. Why did you
so
stop writing?
anyway,
How come you
so
stopped writing? Wait. How come you stopped writing?
oh, I always wrote. I mean, I wrote those four books, but I
Right.
went. I'm not writing anymore because I'm having too good a time. at this wonderful place I'm at now,
Oh, I
this
see. Okay.
camp for seniors. In fact, I'm gonna. Since we started early, I said I would play golf early too, so I'm going off in a few minutes to play golf.
Okay, well, goodbye. Well, this is
So,
really nice to meet you. It's not a should I or shouldn't I. It's who you are, how you got there, where you're going. We don't really know exactly how we're going to get there going, but we do know that we will be leaving.
well, that's great, and I just would say I never. Uh, when I went back to New York after my 2 years in Europe, I tried a lot of different jobs. Again, many different jobs of like working as a secretary and for House Beautiful and tried to get into advertising. But ultimately, I got a job for the welfare department, which was I like so much in Bedford Stuyvesant, going to visit families, and that's how I backed into social work school. I thought this is a great opportunity if I can get to make money by visiting and listening to people. That would be such a joy for me. And just summarize by saying it really was. It's been such a gratifying career. I just can't express how rich it was for me to listen to people's life stories.
Yeah, we hear a lot of good stories. So let's
Right.
close for now. I'd like to ask you one last question.
Sure.
You knew you were going to die shortly. How would you like to be remembered?
I would not like to be remembered at all. I would like to be disappeared forever
Oh,
into stardust. I would love to be just circulating in the cosmos and nobody has any attachments to me. I'm just free to float.
okay, so you will be. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
My magic.
Okay, thank you.